when you see, for example, during one of the qualifying sessions, you see a car coming into the pit box, and then you have like 10 people. They just start doing their thing. They take off the wheel, they kind of polish the stuff, they remove dirt. Like there's no manager screaming at them. You do this, you do that. Like everybody already understands their role and their part, and they just do it. And that's evaluated as well. Like after we've done a race or after we've done something, what did we do? Was it clear? Was it not clear? Anyway, it's a loud environment anyway, so it makes sense not to have somebody screaming at everyone. But yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This is Brave New Work, a podcast about reinventing our organizations and the search for a more adaptive and human way of working. I'm Aaron Dignan, and I'm joined by my sweatered co-host, Rodney Evans.
It's a new sweater. What's up, everyone?
It's slammin'. We are also joined by our own colleague, Jurriaan Kamer, today, who's also the author of the book Formula X, How to Reach Extreme Acceleration in Your Organization. Jurriaan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about the need for organizational speed and other org design lessons that we can learn from Formula One racing, which is pretty hot right now. But before we unpack that, we will check in.
Yeah, we're going to ask Jurriaan to do the check-in round because that's what we do to our beloved
to our
colleagues.
Own colleagues.
Out of laziness and also, shared airspace.
Sure, yeah. So the question I have for you is, what is your relationship to speed? And we'll go Aaron, Rodney, and then myself.
My relationship to speed is declining. So as a young man, I was pretty aggressively into speed. I actually did Skip Barber Formula Ford racing class with my dad when I was in my teens, and we were going real fast, real close to the pavement. And I used to do a lot of other things that were fairly extreme, and that has softened and cooled quite a bit. So the fastest I go these days is maybe trying to get ahead of someone after the light turns green. But I definitely am in a more measured place.
For me, I have never really liked to go fast. So when I was really young, like 5, it's truly one of my earliest memories. My dad took me on one of those roller coasters. It's called like a wild mouse, and it's really jerky, and it makes you feel like you're tipping over the side of things. And it was not a great experience. I did not enjoy the wild mouse, and it sort of ruined me for speed. And then in college, my best friend who was straight edge, so he did not partake in many of the other things that we were partaking in, but he was a total adrenaline junkie, and he did race cars. So I spent a lot of time subsequently in Porsches with roll bars and harnesses, just with my eyes closed, like hoping for the best on hairpin turns in LA. I didn't really like it, but at least with him, I felt fairly safe, but not enjoyable. I don't love it.
That's cool. Yeah, for me, I've done a lot of go-karting in my youth. I don't think I'm that old yet, but I did a lot of go-karting. I drove motorcycles for a while until I got kids, so we paused that for a moment. Mm-hmm. But I think my relationship with speed is mostly not about the speed itself, but about the G-forces you get from accelerating. And fairly recently, I was in the world's fastest roller coaster, which went from 0 to what is it in miles? Like 0 to
60 miles per hour,
240 kilometers an hour.
Oh, geez.
That's too fast.
Yeah, in 5 seconds. So like that was an amazing experience, and just like acceleration is what I get. Like that's why I drive a Tesla, and that's why I drove 2-cylinder motorcycle. So yeah, just love the G-forces.
Rodney, that's about 149 miles an hour.
Gross.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Strapped in your seat.
Well, that's probably good. That's necessary. So today's topic is this connection between Formula One and org design. And I'd like to start by asking you, Jurriaan, for the listeners out there who have absolutely no idea what Formula One is, how would you explain the sport in a sentence or a few?
Yeah, so it's a sport where 10 teams are competing with each other. Every team has 2 racing drivers, and they do 23 races in 23 countries on 5 continents in about 8 months. So it's a huge worldwide circus that travels. There's an average audience of 100 million viewers for each race, so it's pretty big globally. And the reason why I find it so interesting is because these teams are quite big. Like it's the largest team sport in the world, where every team has somewhere between 500 and 2,000 people. And that makes it an interesting example because they run into org design problems like other organizations do.
It's so much bigger than you think about when you first approach the sport in terms of org size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Why is that?
So they manufacture the cars themselves. So in other racing sports, basically you buy a car and you kind of engineer it and tweak it and you can drive it as fast as possible. But in this case, this is the pinnacle of motorsport and the pinnacle of innovation in technology. So they manufacture roughly 80 to 90% of every part that goes in it themselves from scratch. And the more they can do and the more they can do in-house makes them stronger and better. And it's not only the manufacturing of the cars, it's also about, strategy, it's about data analysis, it's about marketing, it's everything. Like, it's a huge industry.
It's almost a company, really, that is just competing against 9 competitors who are going, extremely fast, reinventing the category every year.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
So in your book, Formula X, it is actually a business novel that feels, sort of like the goal, that takes inspiration and lessons from Formula One. What are the big org design lessons that you took away from the sport?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a whole bunch, actually. But I think what is interesting about the Formula One teams is that they're able to crank out roughly 1,000 changes to the car every week. So they're able to innovate at lightning speed, and they're able to evolve the product really quickly. And they found a lot of different ways to do that and to enable them to do it. One of them is that they spend a lot of time learning and reflecting on what's going on. So, for example, if you have a race that lasts roughly 2 hours, they spend more than 2 hours reflecting on all the events that happened during the race. And that's just one of the 50 different pre-planned meetings or reflective meetings that are part of their operating rhythm. So if you compare that to the average organization where we focus a lot on executing versus reflecting, that balance is completely different.
Yeah, we're more of like a 24 hours of Le Mans kind of business culture.
Yeah. Just go forward and don't pause at any time, because that feels like a waste of energy. But they see it as the exact opposite. It's one of the things they do.
That's so interesting. So besides some of those reflective practices, and I love that because we do talk so frequently in companies about, the fact that so many organizations spend 95% of their time together planning and 5% reflecting. And we're like, do it the other way around. So obviously, learning retrospection is something we believe strongly in and don't think there is enough of. When you think more broadly about Formula One through a systems thinking lens, why do you think it's so instructive as a model for organizations that are really looking for more nimbleness, more agility, more speed?
Yeah, so the Formula One teams, they actually prove that it is possible to innovate at this speed in a highly regulated environment. So, like, very often when we try to do stuff around agility with companies, they're like, yeah, that might work for a music player or a startup,
So
but
true.
we're a bank. That doesn't work here. Or there's a regulation that we need to follow. But the rule book in F1 is very big, for good reasons as well. It's also mostly for safety. You cannot kind of have the car fall apart mid race because people get killed. So regulation is tough and strong, and still they're able to innovate. And I think one of the things that really helps, which I don't see often in other companies, is this relentless, clear focus that they have, right? They have a very, very simple and clear focus, which is to win races and win championships. And that is obviously much harder to get clear in our everyday organization, but still you can make a lot of effort to get it to that clarity and to get to an environment where basically every team in the organization knows exactly what they're contributing to that higher goal.
Yeah, I'm always so jealous of activities where winning is observable. You can just
so
say, like,
clear.
There it is. They crossed the finish line first. There's something you said, though, that's a little bit off book here that I want to dig into, which is they have a ton of regulation. There's a big fat rule book, and yet they're doing 1,000 changes a week, which sounds completely unbelievable. What is the relationship like between the regulators or the rule enforcers and the teams that allows that to even happen? Like, how would you even process 1,000 changes in a week with a regulator?
Yeah, I mean, the regulator is definitely not involved in every change, of course, but they set the guardrails within what is needed. So there's different rules for different components. In terms of safety, obviously you need to go through a lot of mandatory safety tests if you change a part that has lots of safety implications, like the crash structure. There's also a lot of regulations to make sure that the playing field is leveled, so that a couple of teams cannot just be so far ahead of the competition. So certain innovations are actually going to be forbidden at a certain moment because it's going to be too expensive or too difficult for other teams to catch up. So it's a really tough one, and especially in the last season, the rules have been bent by teams, and there's lots of controversy around it. But I think in a lot of ways, what teams can do is actually, when they have an innovation they want to bring to the market or to the sport, they can have a conversation in the back room with the regulator, like, hey, we're trying to do this, we think it's legal, what do you think? And please don't tell the other teams. So there's definitely some negotiation happening there as well. And I think it could be similar in the business world, where sometimes there's basically a dialogue happening between the regulator and the organization.
We work in a lot of organizations, and you're in some that you and I have worked in together, where it's sort of like what the regulator says, what the external body says is gospel. And now our job is just to figure out how to comply with the letter of the law, if not with the spirit of the law, frankly, a lot of times. And I often hear this call from leaders that's like, how can we be more collaborative with these regulatory bodies? We actually are in many ways working in aligned purposes, which is often about keeping customers safe or, doing the right thing. But the policies don't always make sense. How can we be at the table influencing that? So I'm just curious, because it sounds like in the Formula One arena, that does happen. Like, what can other kinds of industries learn from how that goes there?
Yeah, I think what is often missed in our everyday organizations is that people don't often look closely to the precise rule book or the precise instruction. What tends to happen is that there's an internal compliance check department that tells people yes or no based on what they bring to them. And then you get all these stories like, oh no, we cannot do this innovation because it's not allowed. But then if you actually go to the actual sentences of the regulator and you look at the rules, oftentimes it is allowed or there is wiggle room there. But we tend to not do it and leave it out to the compliance experts. And I think when you look at Formula One, they really pay really close attention to what is precisely in there, to also know what is not in there, so that actually they can break the rules sometimes to innovate and find a gap in the regulation that gives them a competitive advantage.
So I guess I'm going to zoom back out, which is to focus more on speed as a thing that we even need at all. So it is very impressive what they're doing. It's fantastic that they're moving so quickly and making these changes at scale with large organizations. But why is speed important? What tends to stop organizations from reaching that extreme acceleration, and why do you think it matters?
Yeah, I think it's becoming this, dull catchphrase of, the world is changing more faster, but it is actually true. Like if you want to continue to meet the speed of the market and the customer expectations, to continue to outpace your competitors, it is important to have a certain speed in how you respond to the market and how do you, bring new things to the market. And, so often you see companies not having that. Companies having big trouble, putting something out there, and that you get basically caught up in bureaucracy with, speed of decision making, meetings where you have to propose something and then people not willing to make risks. So yeah, I think it matters. I mean, in a lot of ways, if you don't change, if you don't have the capability to continuously innovate and change, then or bring stuff to market, then you'll decline and die over time, I think.
I feel like there's this misconception that we hold in the world of products and services, particularly products and software products, that some of them are just done. But it's just like, yeah, it feels like Twitter's kind of done. Like it is what it is. And what I love about the Formula One metaphor, analogy, cross learning opportunity is I thought those cars were pretty much done when I was 12 and we were, looking at the state of the industry, and they were screaming fast and amazing, and they could be driven upside down at a high enough speed. They had so much downforce, and it just felt like that's the pinnacle of human engineering. And now we're 20 years later, 30 years later, and you look at it and you're like, oh my God, this thing is a friggin' spaceship. Like there's still more room, which I think is actually a nice challenge to the business community.
Yeah, I mean, the cars are always evolving. The moment one team brings an innovation to the racetrack, other teams take notice and they try to copy it. And on average, over the course of a season, these cars become 2 seconds per lap faster.
Mm.
So imagine showing up at the first race, having the fastest car, and then, like you said, Aaron, just say, "Oh, we're done for this year. Like, we're not going to innovate." You're going to be at the back of the grid roughly halfway the season already. So it's something they need to continuously do. Otherwise, they won't be able to win the championships.
So talking about speed within Formula One's context is pretty straightforward because it's a race and the winner goes the fastest. When you think about speed, Jurriaan, within an organization, what do we actually mean? Because it is a bit more nuanced than just go fast.
Mm-hmm. I would say is minimize time wasted on things that could be better, right? So for me, speed is about always finding ways to go faster and to go better, and not being happy and complacent with the current status quo. There's always things you could improve, and I think what you want is to have an organization where everybody is always on the lookout for things to improve and to go better. Because if that's built in, then you can adapt when you need to adapt.
Yeah. I also think that where I see organizations get this wrong or just misapply this idea is that they just sprint. They just sprint on everything.
Right,
And
right.
and that's not what we mean. Like, I think the more critical elements from your book are about reflection, are about pausing, and are
Yeah.
about clearing out what's not necessary, not just like running harder, which I think, when organizations sort of get this idea about speed, what that often looks like is something that is not going to be sustainable in the long term.
No, that's true. Like it is about sustainable pace, and within that sustainable pace, do the best you can. I think it's really about working smarter all the time instead of working harder all the time. Which faster doesn't mean that you need to work harder.
Yeah.
It's not going from crisis to crisis. That's definitely not the point. It's really the point that when you want to achieve something, do it in the fastest possible way, but do it in a way that you can continue doing that at that pace all the time. So, for example, we can definitely take lessons from a crisis, because if there is a crisis, oftentimes you just drop everything. You get the people together that are the relevant people in the room with the expertise. You get them to solve a problem, and then you disband. And I think that in itself is a lesson of what we could do always, instead of only when there's a crisis, but then do it without the working at nights and different hours. I'm always so surprised when the crisis is over that people go back to their old jobs, and basically all the slow decision making and approvals go back in.
It's like, whew, that was hard.
Yeah. I mean, the recent, the development of the COVID vaccines, there's coming more information out in the open now, how pharmaceutical companies have been able to push those to the market as fast as they did. And a lot of it was about, they basically were able to break through all the bureaucracy and all the red tape and just go fast, and they got approvals for everything, while still obviously keeping the quality and compliance checks in place.
Hey, Rodney, you know what I'd like to see go faster?
What's that?
The growth of this show.
Oh, what's our version of 2 seconds faster on this show?
I think it looks a lot like people that are listening leaving a review or sharing the show with a friend who needs it.
2 to 3 friends who need it?
That'd be great. Yeah, 2 to 3 seconds per lap.
Thanks, friends. So, Jurriaan, in Formula X, you outlined the FASTER model, or 6 ingredients needed to accelerate any organization.
Mm-hmm.
What are the ingredients, and how do they relate to our work?
Yeah, so top to bottom, it's an acronym. So the F stands for focus and clarity, accelerating decisions, simplify, team engagement, elementary physics, and rhythmic learning. So I'm not going to go to all of them in detail, but I think let's start with focus and clarity, I guess. Like the subtitle of that is have a clear and inspiring goal that works as a compass. A lot of that is actually inspired by Greg McKeown's work on essentialism. He was also part of the show, of course. And that is all about, defining a goal, defining an intent that is both inspiring and clear. And it allows everyone in the organization to already know basically what is the thing we need to do. So that work is very important work, because it actually reduces friction in a lot of ways.
So that makes sense. And I think we talk a lot about purpose on the show. One of the things that you said that felt a little more novel was elementary physics for the E of faster. Can you unpack that one a bit?
Yeah, sure. That got in the book because my co-author is a physics professor. So
Perfect.
he has a lot of interesting thoughts about physics in organizations. And actually, Niels Flegging, another thinker in our space, wrote a lot of stuff around that. But the whole idea of using physics as a metaphor in our work is that, first of all, you can use some of the laws of physics here. For example, if you focus on speed, it's maybe less useful. It's more useful to focus on acceleration, because if you are accelerating on a constant pace, you always are a little bit accelerating. Basically, you will go faster every time automatically. So if you go 1% better every day, all your problems will be solved basically by time. And the other part of that chapter is about focusing more on effect, even over focusing on efficiency. In our world, there's a lot of management speak about efficiency, trying to crank out more production with less hours, or maybe tracking time with people, and treating our workforce as factory workers. While in fact, the fastest companies in the world, they understand that effectiveness is more important. So they don't really care if people take more vacation days, or if they run around playing some football on the football table, or it doesn't feel very efficient, but it's super effective.
I like the idea of understanding the physics of your category, or the physics of what you're trying to do, as kind of a first principles understanding of, if we do this, we get that. Yeah. And I remember in one of the Ready's episodes talking about our own growth, Rodney, you and I were talking about when we understood that hiring more people was what drove growth for us, not chasing more work.
Yeah.
That felt like elementary physics.
Yeah, totally. It also, this conversation is making me think about, I really like the acceleration provocation, Jurriaan. And one thing that we've talked a lot about in various pockets at the Ready is how fast can you learn? And that in terms of our own, if what we're trying to do in the world is help organizations become evolutionary and be evolutionary ourselves, the catalyst to evolution is learning. And so it's not about necessarily learning more stuff. It's not about necessarily quantity or even efficiency. It's just how much faster is the cycle time for gathering information from an experiment, from a novel practice, from whatever, integrating it, making use of it, and then being able to apply it. And it's the shorter that cycle time is, the better off we are. So I think that's a really cool provocation, and I think it gets people out of the mindset of just do more faster, because that often doesn't get us much.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think a lot of this goes back to books like The Goal, where we are focusing on the theory of constraints. What is the actual bottleneck here? And optimizing anything but the bottleneck is a waste of energy.
Totally. So in the book you wrote, F1 racing teams and other fast organizations understand that the real risk is that they become too slow to survive. They need everyone in the team to constantly find ways to get another fraction of a second out of the car. How do Formula One teams balance the need to innovate really, really quickly against what's safe to try? So to your point about constraints, we can innovate in a dangerous way, but how do we keep that safe to try constraint in innovation?
Yeah, it is definitely a balancing act. Formula One teams are really good at balancing the idea of risk and reward. So they are very intentional about how much risk are we taking versus what is the possible upside that we're getting. They definitely deploy strategies of diversifying their portfolio of risks, right? Maybe we would definitely want to optimize the current front wing, but also try something really radical with our next year's or next month's front wing. And the interesting thing is that they do a lot of simulation in the computer, in their wind tunnels. And then when they can put it on the car during the practice sessions before the weekend. So they do get to test their innovations on the track to know what is working and what is not working. Yeah. So, and it's all about going fast without sacrificing that quality and reliability and safety that you need. And they have a lot of technology in place to both to simulate things, but also to automate any of those tests that they need to do. So if you have a new part, you press a button and you already know know if it's safe. You don't need to do 5 weeks of testing or other manual stuff. Most of the stuff is automated. For example, one thing I saw when I was at one of the Formula One team's factories, what if they create a new part, they first draw it in the computer. They then almost like 3D print it or make it in a, they've manufacture it in their factory, and then after it's completely done, they do a full, highly detailed 3D scan to know if the part that they created is precisely what they kind of were designing for in the computer. So that you're kind of reducing any possible margin for error there.
Interesting. Before you mentioned that these teams are big, hundreds of people. And I'm imagining, based on everything else you've said, that they're probably not sending every decision up to the CEO for approval before they push it back down. So how does an F1 team empower its structure and its people and its sub-teams to be adaptive and human and resilient and all the things that we talk about on the show?
Yeah, for sure. So there is a very strong role clarity and autonomy in these teams. So like the team principals, they know that they hire very specialized talent, and there's no point in telling them how to do their jobs. I mean, there's definitely clear priorities from the top and from left to right in terms of what the team wants to focus on, what areas that needs improvement, and but the within the teams there's a high autonomy of how to do that. And one example of that role clarity is when you see, for example, during one of the qualifying sessions, you see a car coming into the pit box, and then you have like 10 people. They just start doing their thing. They take off the wheel, they kind of polish the stuff, they remove dirt. Like there's no manager screaming at them, you do this, you do that. Like everybody already understands their role and their part, and they just do it. And that's evaluated as well. Like after we've done a race or after we've done something, what did we do? Was it clear? Was it not clear? Anyway, it's a loud environment anyway, so it makes sense not to have somebody screaming at everyone. But yeah,
that's interesting. I'm curious if a lot of that role work is done, which has very direct parallels to self-managing teams. Like, how dynamic can those teams be? So if I'm someone who cleans dirt off the car and you're someone who changes tires, do I know how to do that job in case you get distracted by something else?
Well, no, not necessarily, but there's definitely some parallels in the pit stop teams. Basically the mechanics that change the tires in 2 seconds. What actually is interesting about that is that the crew that's doing that has additional roles during the rest of the weekend. So, for example, the person that's removing the right rear wheel of of Red Bull Racing, one of the racing teams, is actually the truckie that during outside of the race window is responsible for driving the trucks to the airport. And I know the person that's lifting the front wing is one of the IT guys that actually has most of their job before the weekend setting up the IT connectivity, and then during the race can do something else. So there is definitely fluidity of roles. But that's mostly, I think, in the racing team. It's a small team that goes to the racetrack. They can only bring roughly 60 people to the racetrack, and the other 900 or 1,500 people in the factory, they don't have a role during the race. And I would say like the special with this size, there's lots of specialism. So I would say like if you're a gearbox or an aerodynamics expert, I don't see you play in other roles that much though.
I think that's a really interesting point though, because in a lot of recent episodes where we've been talking more about DAOs and role clarity, and Aaron and I talking about our own roles in self-management and things like that, it's like, I think what you're pointing at is a very smart way to slice roles that can be more dynamic and roles that require more stasis because of the level of subject matter expertise they need. So I think it's a cool mental model for like where to constrain that, where to encourage people to hold multiple roles so that they can be more dynamic, wear multiple hats, get some efficiency and cross-learning, and where that doesn't work as well.
And not to beat a drum that I beat constantly, but what you're seeing there is literally the bifurcation between the complex and the complicated. Building a race car is complicated. Racing it is complex. And so here's the complex team coming to the track with a different set of, constraints, and then the factory team producing something that has to be high tolerance and meeting these specifications.
Smart.
Low tolerance, I should say.
So, Jurriaan, why write a business fable rather than just a straight up nonfiction book. How do you think presenting these lessons in this more narrative story has helped spread the message?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. Well,
I feel
first,
subtweeted.
First of all, I just really enjoy reading business fables. So I thought when I was going to write a book, let's write a business fable because it's just fun to do.
Hard +1 to that. I hate business books.
Yeah, but the thing is, very often when I show a case study article to a client, they're like, yeah, but we're not Spotify.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, nice. And then I send them another article like, yeah, I know, but we're not, we're not higher, or we're much like there's always excuses why the examples that you put in front of them are not relevant, are not applicable.
Yeah.
But if you give them a story or something that's so far out of their relational zone of, like, for example, Formula One, they're much more receptive to then thinking of going in a different mindset, like, it's not us, but what can I learn here? So that's one way, one reason. The other thing is that the story in the book is really an arc of struggle. So in the story, you'll follow the general manager of a kitchen factory, and he's trying to radically accelerate its organization, but he's failing, and he's trying all the traditional ways, who then fails, like all the traditional top-down control-y type ways. And then after visiting an F1 race and being able to go behind the scenes there, he gets some inspiration. He starts applying some of those lessons. And I think in a story format, you can just put more ideas in rather than having checklists or like boring chapters who just outline the steps.
Totally. You're telling me.
Your book is an exception, Aaron, but truly, I feel like my reading taste is like, if it's going to be really heavily work related, then I need it to be fed to me like a story. Yes. Or if it's going to be nonfiction and nerdy, then I need it to be something adjacent. Like I'll read all day about like social psychology, but I don't want to read like a business book that's in the airport.
And I think so this book came out, I think, about a year after Brave New Work came out. And I've been pitching it as the appetizer for Brave New Work.
Nice.
So, like, if you have a leader or someone you want to convince, and they're just so busy, they're never going to really go through a dense book like Brave New Work is. But maybe they have 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon to read a story. Like, you can send them Formula X, and they will get some of the same lessons. And if they like it, maybe it's a gateway drug to the Brave New Work book.
That is funny.
I love that.
So, I've noticed something which I love the synchronicity of, because it feels like we've kind of made it through the arc that we wanted to hit together, and so it does seem like a pretty good place to draw things to a close. And this would be, if we drew it to a close right now, I believe one of our fastest episodes. Even though it's felt very spacious and luxurious, but somehow we've been able to be quite efficient and precise. And so I just think that's fantastic. Jurriaan, where can our listeners find out more about you and your work and your book?
Yeah, you can contact me at jurriaankamer.com. I'm Jurriaan Kamer on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And you can look for Formula X in all of your favorite bookstores.
Jurriaan, thank you so much for joining us for this very speedy and also very informative episode.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it a lot.
A quick tip of the hat to Taylor Marvin for making us sound good. Brave New Work is produced by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work as fast as they can. Get in touch with us by emailing podcast@theready.com. And as for you, thanks for listening. Now go change something.